If you imagine what it took us to get out of the Great Depression and how long it took and the pain that was involved in all that, and look at where we are now and see we've actually got, when we started the crisis, 1.7 times the level of private debt they had back in the end of the 1920s. So we've got ourselves a bigger hole we've dug ourselves into. I really don't think we can get out of it without deliberately reducing the debt by government action. And what I mean, I don't know by government spending, I mean deciding to write off the debt. So we need what I call a modern debt jubilee. Because if you look back historically, ancient civilization, we used to have jubilees. The story was once every 50 years, or 49 years most likely, and once every time a king changed. After the Sumerian Empire, that became instituted every 50 years. Literally all debts were eliminated. That was a known pattern in society. Debt slaves were freed and so on. Michael Hudson's done some great historical work on that and why that happened. We've got to the stage where we think creditors must be protected. Debt can't be written off. If you took out the debt, it's the responsibility of the debtors, etc., etc. But we think about it, what was that debt created to do? And who had the brain power in the negotiations over the level of debt? Was it the people lending the money or the people borrowing it? Now, you had this most bizarre situation where people who had no known capacity to pay, the old ninja loans, were being lent money by people with, managers paying themselves multi-million dollars and more PhDs than you could poke Cape Canaveral at. So the brain power and the responsibility, and I think the moral side of it, was on the side of the lenders, not the borrowers. The borrowers actually were trusting banks because that's one thing you should be able to do. A capitalist system functions well when you can trust the banks. But there's abuse of trust in the banks. They create a debt they should never have created, should never have been allowed to be created, and they should never have been allowed to sell it to people in the public either through securitized loan, which they have done. So I've got this incredible mess. And if you try to forgive debtors now, a lot of people who see themselves as savers, because they've bought bonds, they've got no debt and so on and so forth, they'd say, what about moral hazard? You can't let the debtors off. And my feeling is we have to acknowledge that. But a way to do that is to make a government cash injection, which the Federal Reserve created, and they can do it under Section 13.3 of the Federal Reserve Act. If you check Section 13.3, you can see the Federal Reserve can directly give money to private institutions. It doesn't have to give them to the banks alone. Takes an emergency situation, but they can do it. Give a cash injection, which goes to people, on a per capita basis. I really haven't tried to work out details of this, but something like that. And then if you're in debt, let's say you got $100,000 per person. If you had debt, you would have to pay the debt down. No choice. The $100,000 would reduce your debt by $100,000, and that would be it. If you are not a debtor, you'd get $100,000 into your deposit account, which you could spend. Now, this would feed through the system, so the banks would be forced to write their debt down because they're having the debt paid off. Securitized loans, which were backed by that debt, will also fall in value, so people who are savers would see the value of those bonds decline, but they'd be compensated by the cash injection. So something like that as a deliberate policy to reduce the level of debt, I think is necessary.